The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
Chicago teachers get ready to walk off the job. But what will a one-day strike really accomplish? Chicago's top cop drama. Mayor Emanuel makes an end run around his own police board to choose a new leader for the city's embattled police force. And gentrification in Chicago. Luxury high-rises, pricey condos, and trendy shops are pushing out longtime residents in up-and-coming neighborhoods. We'll have these stories and much more tonight on In the Loop. Good evening. I'm Chris Bury. For the first time ever, Chicago teachers will be staging a one-day walkout tomorrow. Their union wants to send a message not just to the school district, but to Springfield as well. This week, we spoke with parents of Chicago public school students about that one-day walkout.
I really think they should give the teachers what they want. I really do.
If it weren't for teachers, it wouldn't be anyone. Teachers, police officers, it wouldn't be anything. So I think they're underpaid.
That was the sentiment among most parents who were picking up their kids outside Wentworth Elementary in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood. On the city's north side, outside Blaine Elementary, families had mixed feelings about the teachers walking out.
I feel bad for the teachers. However, I think under contract during a school year, I would prefer that they didn't strike and they continued with their contract and then did the negotiations off-season.
Cullerton's daughter disagrees with her father. She is siding with the teachers.
We're seeing a mass privatization of public schools in Chicago and throughout the rest of the country. I think Rahm Emanuel is at fault here. I think Governor Rauner is at fault here. I absolutely support the union.
The school district calls the union action an illegal strike because it violates an agreed-upon set of procedures that must be followed before teachers can walk out. Under state law, the earliest teachers could hit the picket line is the middle of May. But the union insists the walkout is justified because of what it claims is an unfair labor practice, the elimination of what's called step and lane, a mechanism for awarding teacher pay raises based on education and experience. Not all teachers are on board with the strike, but few of them would agree to go on camera. One parent at Blaine worries students are caught in the middle.
It's frustrating. They say that they care about the kids, but and I know they have their most power to strike during the school year and take days off like that, but it really hurts the kids.
Other groups will be joining teachers for the one-day strike, including one called the Fight for $15. Fast food workers linking their call for higher wages with school funding. The CTU says it's getting support from at least 50 other allied community groups and unions. The teachers' walkout is expected to start early Friday morning at CPS schools and conclude with a massive rally in the afternoon at the Thompson Center downtown.
They work hard. They're in school every day with our children. So why not give them what they want? They help us with our children. Well, they don't get at home, they get at school.
Joining us to talk more about the teacher strike and other topics, Sarah Karp, reporter for WBEZ Radio. Todd Belcour, Executive Director for the nonprofit organization Social Change, and David Vigiano, Media Relations Director for Alpatac Public Relations, and welcome everybody. So Sarah, let me begin with you. What's the point of a strike that's just one day?
Well, that's a good question. And, they say that it's directed at Governor Rauner. And, while I see that their point in that, there's no budget, there's the revenue for schools that the mayor's been asking for has not come through from the state. There's lots of reasons not to be very happy with Governor Rauner. At the same time, I'm sort of concerned that Governor Rauner doesn't really care that much if Chicago public schools aren't in session. And I guess that wouldn't be a reason not to do it, but I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of members of the union are sort of questioning, why are we doing this? It's not like, so my question to the union that I've been asking is, so what would a win look like? Because usually you strike and then you can say, okay, this is what we want and this is what we've won. What would a win look like? And since the reason is so amorphous, it's sort of hard to tell what that win would be.
Is the win, Todd, is the win just more publicity for their cause? Is that what the objective is here, do you think?
I think that's an important objective to try to attain. I mean, the bottom line is you can't ignore the direct relationship between the fiscal and the pension crisis that we have in Illinois and Chicago and the need to have a strike. The schools are underfunded. 62 staff and teachers have been laid off. They're being asked to take a pay decrease and have less time with students. In a school structure that requires so much time with students, and we value the time that teachers have with students, it seems like it's reasonable for for teachers to band together and say enough is enough and try to make their point to the general audience, who can then add to the pressure being put on Governor Rauner and Mayor Emanuel.
But David, you've got 330,000 students and their parents, of course, who are being affected by that. Is it worth it?
Is it worth it? I don't know. I agree. One day is only making a point. There's not going to be a win. I also think that if you're going to choose one day to try to make a point, I think it's, as a marketing person, it's a really silly thing to do on April 1st, because April Fool's Day is not the perfect day.
That would be a marketing point of view.
There you go, to have people take you seriously. But I do understand why they're doing it. I think it's really, really difficult, too, if they want to get public sentiment on their side. Doing this on a Friday during rush hour when it's going to rain, it's already a nightmare in Chicago, and I've seen it. I've seen it explode all over social media. People get really angry at these protests and the protesters, and it doesn't help their cause because all they see is disruption. So I think we have to really think about how we're going to go about making change and making our point.
I think David makes a good point, Sarah. I mean, can the teachers' union count on the sympathy of the public here?
Yeah, I think a lot of people generally, polling for the teachers is very high. People support their teachers. I mean, you know, everybody's had a teacher. Everybody has knows somebody who is a teacher. So I think it's very high. But I do think people can get a little bit tired of it. Now, on the other hand, a lot of people are being affected by the fact that the state has no budget. And a lot of people are, concerned about what's going on in the state of Illinois. I mean, look, we're losing population. There's a lot of troubles here. So in that sense, I think that people might have sympathy, not just for the teachers, but for the general cause of, the state. It feels like, there's a lot of trouble and people want something to happen, and they want the governor and, the state legislature to get off their butts and get a budget and move the state forward.
But CPS is saying, Todd, that this is an illegal strike. Should that give the teachers some pause, that it's against the law, according to CPS?
Well, I think there's a counter-argument to that clearly the teachers agree with, that there's a violation of the contract that allows them the opportunity to make this sort of effort in the first place. And I think it's important not to disregard that the teachers have been actively engaging in negotiations for a period of time, have undertaken the fact-finding process, and throughout that entire process, not enough was done to make sure that the teachers and the education for our students was secured properly.
I also think, what the definition of illegal strike. I mean, it's one thing that Karen Lewis will say in response to that. Karen Lewis, being the CTU president, was what Rosa Parks did legal?
So civil disobedience.
Civil disobedience is not always legal. And then what is really the repercussion? I mean, Chicago Public Schools could go to court and say, okay, we don't want them to strike, but they can't what are they going to do? Lock the teachers in the classrooms, lock the teachers in the schools? I mean, what is really, now they're not going to pay teachers who don't come to work on Friday, and I think teachers are, willing to take that loss. Some are, and so, I mean, that's really the only leverage they have. I mean, what can really happen? I mean,
David.
I do agree that their public sentiment is on the teacher's side, but I think that especially how it's portrayed in the media, they have to be very careful because they're looking at things like the teachers only, we hear a lot about how the teachers only put 2% into their pension, and the government and our taxes have to take care of the rest. And the teachers are asking for a tax hike from Governor Rauner so they can help pay their salary. And I think those kind of things don't play well for the teachers. And I think that if they're willing and they're vocal about wanting to compromise a little bit more, I think that more sentiment, and maybe we'll make some room for some change.
Other big news this week. Mayor Rahm Emanuel rejecting the advice of his own police board and appointing Patrol Chief Eddie Johnson as the interim superintendent. Smart move?
I think this is a brilliant move for Rahm Emanuel, and I think it's for a couple of reasons. One, his favorable ratings are at an all-time low. He's lost a lot of his power. People talk about wanting to oust him out of office, and this was a win-win for him. He takes his power back, and he shows that he's assertive. The Black and the Latino caucuses are very much in favor. He's taking an insider when we've seen that two outsiders have not affected much change. So I think everything that this was a really smart move on his part.
But what's the point of a police board that went out and did this nationwide search if you're going to ignore their advice, Todd?
I at least politely push back a bit on that. I think to bypass the process that's already in place is really another example of Rahm ramming something through, despite the concerns of the community that came to bear, to bring a list of finalists to before him. And the other issue is, while you may say an outsider is a negative, I think if you have an institution that the community doesn't trust in general, and then you pull someone from within that community, you can see how the optics of that don't look very good.
I agree.
But all that being said, I do think the actual choice he made was good, but I think he should have gone the proper process so everyone had a chance to vet him like every other candidate that was being considered.
Yeah, and has anybody asked Eddie Johnson why didn't he apply?
Well, he has said because Escalante, the interim superintendent was going to apply, and he did not want to step. He did not want to step on that.
So he was being a gentleman.
And I don't think the mayor did really necessarily went around. It's how you put the spin on it. I mean, he could reject these three, right, and then have to go to a vote again. So what he did was assign him as another interim, right? So he's basically saying, I'm rejecting these three, so we have to put up a vote. Hopefully that he's going to apply now, and he will be passed on.
Well, he will apply, but that raises the question. If you know that the mayor wants Eddie Johnson, and why would anyone else from around the country apply to a position that is very clearly a done deal? Sure.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, and Rahm is so funny because he says, well, I followed the process. It's like, well, in what world did you follow the process? In like the Rahm world, the process is, he just handpicked someone. And I do think because people do support Eddie Johnson, I think that's a big plus. And obviously he checked with them. So, we heard that over the weekend there were conversations. But it's also a kind of crazy thing. You wake up on Easter Sunday morning to the news that he did this. I think there's so many troubles with the police department that it's going to go beyond, okay, is Eddie Johnson going to be able to build those bridges? I think that's going to be the true test. I mean, how he got to that position, I think that will be sort of washed away if he does a good job. Now, if he does a horrible job, Rahm's going to own this. If there's it's some big controversy, Rahm's owning it because Rahm handpicked this guy, not the police board, not any community process. It's Rahm Emanuel.
But has Sarah picked up on the crucial point that is the way that this superintendent is going to be judged is whether or not he can rebuild trust? Is that the key question here?
Absolutely. Yes. What I want to say is that I think that as building trust, he basically has it at this point. I mean, he's a trusted member of the community. He's a trusted service member as a policeman. So I think he already has it, and that's a great place to start.
Yeah, so one of the things he consistently harped on when he had his press conferences was the word trust, given the importance it is, the broken trust between the community and law enforcement. But also, it's important if we're going to have these reforms being implemented, that the police officers actually trust the superintendent. So you need that level of respect and trust from colleague to colleague for them to actually adhere to the new regulations and implementation of policies that may come down soon, and make sure that the community gets the results they need in terms of transparency and accountability.
Let's look at the context in which this appointment is being made. Here in Chicago, first few months of the year, we've had 135 homicides. That's up 85% over this time last year. We're on track for the worst year since before 2012, which was a horrible year. Shootings have nearly doubled. Sarah, is this urgency for some kind of an insider? Is that part of the argument that the crime here is getting so out of hand that he's got to get somebody who knows the neighborhood?
Well, it could be that. You could also look at it from the other point of view. I mean, right now it's an insider who's running the department and things aren't going so great. I think maybe the greatest reason to have somebody, sort of handpicked in that interim position that we know is going to get the job is that maybe there needs to be some stability in that position. I would argue that a lot of other things are happening in the state and in education and in employment and that are affecting that murder rate. I mean, some of it is the police's fault, but there's certainly, community factors that are affecting that murder rate, and those are the types of things that we need to start working on and get beyond just sort of like the narrow issue of how police deal with the public.
Although there are some other interesting statistics on that, because police interactions with the public are way down, gun seizures are way down. David, does this suggest that morale within the police department is really at a low, is really suffering?
I absolutely think that is, and I think there's, you know, in their own private protest on their time, that's how they determine, you know, why they're not stopping people and putting people over. That's a really difficult thing to say, is this good or is this bad? I mean, some people say it's racial profiling, other people say this is how we man our neighborhoods. So the fact, though, that I think that these stops and these manning the neighborhoods are down, I think is a direct correlation with the murder rate going up.
And Todd, what's your thought with those two things? I mean, crime skyrocketing, police morale down. Are these both two good arguments for Eddie Johnson?
They actually are. I mean, they speak very specifically to the issue here. If they brought someone from the outside, someone had to reacclimate themselves, not just with the city, but with the department, the culture. So it is important for someone who actually understands the department, understands the streets of Chicago, has 27 years of experience on the beat, working with the community and working with the police officers. I think now it just remains to be seen if he'll take the steps necessary to reverse the corrupt culture within the police department to make sure that we get the accountability and transparency we need.
The other big story, sort of from the crime blotter this week, the development that former Governor Rod Blagojevich appealed to the United States Supreme Court to overthrow his sentence. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his appeal. And what do you think? I mean, is this a moment where there should be some mercy? There's going to be some resentencing? Should the federal judge perhaps look at a lower sentence for Blagojevich?
You're asking me. I don't know. I mean, you know.
Since you know him better.
Right, since I know him
Our
best.
panel has to take the
I'm no
stance.
I'm no fan of corrupt politicians. I mean, and I'm no fan of sort of the way he held that office. And I mean, I don't think that showing too much mercy is really, I mean, we have a pretty corrupt state. I mean, how many governors are in office? I think we sort of need to say, this is not good, and if you do this, you should go to jail and serve your sentence. I mean, you know, I know there's other factors.
Well, the appeals court has thrown out 5 of the counts against Blagojevich. And so, Todd, the Sun-Times this week had an editorial asking Judge Zagel for some mercy here to temper justice. Do you think that sentence should be reduced?
Well, anytime you throw out 5 counts, you think it at least merits resentencing. And certainly, when not to excuse his actions, but the idea of a politician using their power for personal gain is not so outlandish. For 14 years makes the most sense. You've got other governors in other states who are knowingly allowing for folks in different communities to have poisoned water, and they're walking the streets without issue. So I do think people should be punished for their wrongdoings. It just seems when you look at that and contrast some of the actions of other governors and other politicians nationwide, that should at least be revisited in terms of resentencing.
I agree, but I think the timing for Blagojevich to do this right now was all because I really think it's all part of his ego. It's just he hasn't been in the spotlight for a while and he wants to be back in there. He knows that they couldn't do anything and it would be thrown out. I can't believe that his lawyer didn't know that because they haven't done the resentencing yet. And nothing really could be determined until after that's done. So why do this now except to get him back in the spotlight and get people talking about him?
Sarah, apparently he's been a model prisoner. He's been in there for 4 years. Does that sway you at all?
It doesn't surprise me. I mean, come on, you know. Well, it would be surprising if he wasn't a model prisoner. I'd like to see that behavior, but, you know, this is a white-collar crime. It's not like, you know, I don't know, what if he became a coke addict behind bars? That would be interesting, right?
We're going to be back with our panel in just a minute. Mayor Emanuel has announced the city's newest park called the Paseo. It will be built on an abandoned rail line running from Little Village to Pilsen. While residents welcome the news, they also worry it will fuel Chicago's gentrification, that is, longtime residents pushed out by rising real estate values. Barbara Pinto reports starting in Pilsen.
For almost 60 of her 89 years, Lucy Gutierrez has called Pilsen home. She raised her family in this close-knit Mexican community. Her daughter, Rosemary Sierra, still lives here too. But lately, mother and daughter feel less at home as 20-somethings and students move in.
They are young, you know, we call them hipsters.
And old friends move out.
I've seen people leave and sell their houses at such ridiculous prices
because it wasn't that they didn't want to stay here. It was that the rents start going up and they could not afford to pay the taxes.
Gentrification has come to Pilsen. Family businesses and bodegas bulldozed to make way for trendy restaurants and coffee shops. Condo developers offered Lucy more than $300,000 for the home she bought for only $8,000 decades ago.
I don't care how much money they put on the table. I don't want it. The only way I'm leaving is when they take me out feet first.
But many in this mostly working-class neighborhood cannot afford to stay. Byron Sigcho directs the Pilsen Alliance.
10,000 Latinos have left the neighborhood in the last 10 years, and that's a huge number. I think that's what we're trying to prevent, more people leaving their neighborhood. We want to create a diverse, a welcoming, vibrant community, but that is inclusive, is for everyone, not only for those who can afford it.
That sentiment has turned to protest.
This is not for sale! This is not for sale!
Of new condo developments residents feel don't offer enough affordable housing. Pilsen is swept up in Chicago's latest wave of gentrification. First the North Side in the 70s and 80s, then Bucktown, Wicker Park, the South and West Loop, and now Pilsen, Bridgeport, Logan Square, and Humboldt Park. Lauren Nolan tracks Chicago's gentrification for the Voorhees Center for Neighborhood and Community Improvement. She says price pressures further polarize the city into affluent neighborhoods and deep pockets of poverty.
And it's resulting in a big affordability crisis, which is really affecting the overall health of the city.
From their home in Humboldt Park, Mary Scott Boria and her daughter Carmen watch the slow but steady transformation.
10 years ago, 15 years ago, you tell people you lived in Humboldt Park, and people are like, well, Humboldt Park, how could you live there? You know, that it had this reputation of being sort of gang infested.
Gentrification, they say, has its upside. Less gang and drug activity, more stores and restaurants, and the recent opening of the Bloomingdale Trail, a $95 million linear park built on an abandoned rail line. But progress has its price.
A friend of mine who lives in the area, who lives right on the trail, and she got a notice saying, you can stay here when your lease is up, but your rent is going to go up by $450 a month.
Here in Humboldt Park, only 35% of residents own homes. The majority, 65%, rent, and worry that all this new development will price them right out of their own neighborhoods. Alderman Roberto Maldonado worries too. His 26th ward includes Logan Square and Humboldt Park.
Economic development is the creation of jobs, keeping jobs in this neighborhood, attracting new jobs. Economic development is not building $1 million plus homes and in spaces where you had modest home and kicking the old neighborhood or neighbors out.
Maldonado has changed zoning to make his ward less attractive to condo developers and is trying to cap property tax assessments near the Bloomingdale Trail, but home prices are already soaring. In Logan Square, the average price of a single-family home is $477,500. That's up more than 27% from 2013. In Humboldt Park, the average cost is $100,000, up 52% from just 3 years ago. Back in Pilsen, Rob Ibanez manages Simone's, a craft beer pub that opened on 18th Street about 7 years ago. He sees the influx of new neighbors as the latest chapter in Pilsen's rich history. As home to Czech immigrants, then Mexicans, and now a new generation.
It's not just one group of people that's moving down here to Pilsen. There are all kinds of ethnic backgrounds and groups that are moving into the neighborhood. I feel like it's a very colorful neighborhood right now.
In Chicago, I'm Barbara Pinto for In the Loop.
Thanks, Barbara. And we're back again with Sarah Karp, Todd Belcour, and David Vigiana. So, David, gentrification is a bad word in some places, but doesn't it also bring some real benefits to those neighborhoods?
Of course, and I think it's just the natural ebb and flow of a city like Chicago. I've lived in lots of the city in the neighborhoods when they were just starting to gentrify, and I got pushed out of several too when I was younger and not making enough money. I think that's just the way capitalism works. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I live, though, up in West Ridge now, and I love it because it hasn't been gentrified, and it's a very mixed neighborhood, and that's why I like living there.
And Todd, are these just market forces at work?
I think David brings up a good point in terms of being mixed neighborhoods. It's important for the city to retain its soul and have that diversity. And once you start having the premise that you only get these services when you gentrify, you only get a crime-free neighborhoods, you only get good schools when you gentrify, that actually gets to the heart of the issue with the leadership we have in Chicago. And I think that's the thing that needs to be fixed, not necessarily population changes, but leadership changes, and make sure that communities, no matter what their color or background, have the supports and the infrastructure they need to be healthy and vibrant.
But how do you strike that balance, Sarah? I mean, is it a matter of zoning or is it rent control? I mean, what kinds of specifics would actually take those market forces and put some policy behind it?
I think that's the key, is that we need to understand what's going on and take some strong policy movements to try and make sure that neighborhoods do stay mixed. And it's more than just housing. I mean, sometimes when you look at schools, which I've covered schools for a long time, and a lot of times when you have neighborhoods gentrify, at first nobody goes to the neighborhood schools. And then the neighborhood schools have no people. And the kids that are left in those neighborhood schools are, they wind up not getting as rich of an education. Well, over time, sometimes people start investing in the neighborhood schools, but what ends up happening is the kids that were there, they get pushed out. They do things, we have policies that actually cater to the gentrifiers, but don't worry about the people that have been there, the families that have been there for a long time. And when those people get pushed out, then what you wind up having is you don't take advantage of the wonderful thing that you could have, which is a mixed income school, which is actually better for both the kids that are, the more wealthy kids and the poorer kids.
Should we turn the question around? I mean, should the city be encouraging gentrification in some areas? And I'm thinking particularly the South and West Side, which are, in many places, are economic wastelands, communities like Roseland.
I think the city should be encouraging economic development. I think the city should be encouraging making strong schools and crime-free communities. And once they do that,
but don't you have to have a private investment in there to do those things first?
Well, I think so, but we also have tax dollars that we can direct very specifically. And they don't necessarily have to go to new stadiums for DePaul. They can go directly to programs and institutions to build up the infrastructure for these communities to make sure they're vibrant as well.
And there's a big difference between, okay, the gentrifier who is affording a $500,000 house and just, bringing nice, solid, middle-class families back into neighborhoods. And I mean, that's what you'd like to see in neighborhoods is you just want, most people are working people. You want to see neighborhoods where people, working families are living in houses and, supporting the businesses, and there's businesses in the neighborhoods to support. We don't need, necessarily 1%ers to all be in the city.
David, you've got a point. Why don't you jump in?
Well, you brought up a point earlier. I think rent control is really important. I think nobody should be forced to say, you can stay here if you want to pay $475 more a month. I just think that's a key way to destroy a community that's mixed. And I think it's really, really important that we keep rents reasonable and no huge jumps like that people have to move out.
On that note, we are running out of time. Thank you so much to our guests, Sarah Karp, Todd Belcour, David Vigiano. That wraps up tonight's show. You are now in the loop. And to learn more about our show or tonight's guests, please log on to wycc.org and click on In the Loop. Until next week, I'm Chris Bury.